Ladies and gentlemen, we are very happy and honored to welcome at Ukraine Crisis Media Center Mr. Carl Bildt, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden, whose tweets we follow regularly. Welcome again to Ukraine. I look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Thanks very much. This is, as a matter of fact, my first visit ever to the Ukrainian Media Center, although it is my sixth visit to Ukraine during the last 7-8 months or something like that, which is testimony to the fact, of course, that Ukraine is at the center of the attention not only of Europe, but of the world, and the importance of what is happening here. What am I doing, then, you might ask? Well, apart from coming now then to Kiev for the political talks that for obvious reasons are centered on the capital of the country, I made it a point to go to the different parts of Ukraine, to look not only at the political situation, but also at the potential, the economic potential of the country. Because I think it is important both to deal with the acute crisis, needless to say, but also to focus on the long-term issues, primarily economic, and the potential that Ukraine represents, potential for Ukraine itself, but also potential for Europe as a whole. So I spent yesterday and most parts of the day in the Kerasawan region, which is, of course, down in the south. I was, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Odessa, where I had been a couple of times before, but it was my first visit to the Kerasawan region. And I was impressed by what I saw down there in terms of what I knew in theory before, but could now see in practice the enormous potential that the country has in terms of food and food processing industry. Ukraine has some of the best agricultural lands in the world, and we are in a world where food will be in increasing demand. And I had the opportunity both to visit very successful Swedish investments that are doing extremely well in this particular area. I saw other international investors in the area in the same realm of business, and I had the opportunity to talk with quite a large number of Ukrainian businessmen in different sectors to discuss the problems as well as the possibilities. But I returned from that visit even more confident about the potential that is there for Ukraine in the future. That being said, the country is going through very difficult also economic times. I've said it very many times before, this is the most misgoverned of all countries that were part of the Soviet Union once upon a time, with a substantially worse economic performance over the years. A lot of this we can blame on Yanukovych and the corruption, but not everything. The misgovernance has been there for a prolonged period of time. Now the crisis is deep, but in every crisis there's an opportunity. And I really salute the government of Prime Minister Yatsenyuk for the courage that he has demonstrated with the IMF program and with the deep and comprehensive reforms that will be there. Some of them painful, some of them I'm quite certainly not popular, but all of them absolutely necessary to turn this country around and to demonstrate the full potential of Ukraine in the years ahead for the people of Ukraine, as I said, but also for all of Europe and for all of those that would be benefiting from a far better development of the country. I will be having talks here. I will be in the square, whatever square it was, tomorrow morning. Sorry? Mastejska Arsenal, yes. At 10 o'clock, where we are celebrating Europe Day tomorrow, together with the Prime Minister, among others. Prior to that, I will be with the Minister of Economic Affairs at the Kiev School of Economics and discussing primarily the economic development. Let me also say, and very much welcome, I saw that you had a briefing on that earlier today, the report on the human rights situation in Ukraine by the United Nations that was released earlier. I think this is a very comprehensive, very impressive, very important report. It refutes a lot of the Russian propaganda that the Russian media outlets are trying to pour over primarily the population of Russia that is deprived of objective information, but also other quarters. At the same time, as it does raise serious concerns. The Crimean Tatar issue, we get reports today about sort of house searches and things like that on the Crimea, but also, of course, the deteriorating situation for human rights in the east of the country. I think I stop there, because otherwise it develops into a much too lengthy speech, and then I can at least try to answer the questions that some of you might have.
Переклад, пан
Do you want to use the headset for the translation?
Do I want to use the headset?
Yeah, it's right here.
Good, I just get it. Wait. Fine.
Окей. Олена Мацюцька, ТСН 1+1. У мене запитання з приводу санкцій, тому що, крім кризи економічної, про яку ви говорили, зараз у нас доволі важко в політичному плані. І раніше не йшлося про дедлайн для Росії, якщо будуть якісь непорозуміння щодо України. А напередодні було сказано про 25 число. Тобто, що передбачає Європа і світ, що могла би зробити Росія, що вони говорять, що санкції будуть у разі там чогось. Саме от йдеться про 25 число, про день виборів. Які санкції і чи дійсно вони будуть?
Well, whether they will happen or not is dependent upon Russia and the behavior of Russia. As you know, we attach, as does everyone, supreme importance to the presidential elections on May the 25th. And I'm deliberately not meeting any of the candidates in the presidential election when I'm here this time, for the reason that I think their prime task is not to meet with foreigners. Their prime task is to meet with the Ukrainian electorate these very days. And we've made very clear that attempts by anyone to disrupt the election or to question the legitimacy of election is not acceptable. And that's where we end up with the sanctions issue. I think we were very clear from the meeting of the EU foreign ministers on Monday. Then you might ask detail, what exactly does that mean? We don't answer that question deliberately. There has to be a certain vagueness to this. They should not be absolutely certain what will happen. They should be absolutely certain that if their policies of destabilization goes on, we will take measures. Then I have to add that I think that if you look at the sanctions or restrictive measures that we have been taken, the far more effective, sorry to say, measures against the Russian economy has been taken by President Putin himself. I mean, the massive outflows of capital from the country. I mean, the figures that the ECB released the other days are really well beyond any figures that we were aware of previously that are flowing out of Russia at the moment. And I know from my contacts with business circles in Sweden and elsewhere that any thought of investments in Russia are, mildly speaking, on hold. This is doing long-term damage to the Russian economy. This is not a good thing. We don't wish Russia ill and the population, but these are the consequences of the uncertainty concerning the future of Russia that the policies of President Putin has led to. But return to the beginning of the answer, the elections are really key. May 25th, if there will be a second round or not, remains to be seen, but you have a government which is a fully legitimate government, by the way. I think that needs to be repeated sometimes. But you only have an interim president, and I think it would be very good for the political stability of the country to have the fully legitimate political authorities on all levels as soon as possible.
We have a question here, please.
Альона Чернецька, канал 24. Пане Карло, скажіть, будь ласка, Європа наполягає все-таки на мирному вирішенні проблем на Сході. На вашу думку, як конкретно можна у мирний спосіб вирішити саме проблеми на Сході? І чи, можливо, потрібно домовлятися з мирним населенням, адже з сепаратистами не виходить?
of course, everyone wants a peaceful solution to the problems of the East, no question about that. And I'm quite certain that is the determination of the Ukrainian authorities. Exactly how that should be done, that's the responsibility of them, not of us. And I have full confidence in the way in which these are handling these things. Then, at the same time, no question that the Ukrainian authorities have a duty to uphold the law of the land and try to sort of take action against illegal armed groups. They've done that very, very carefully. And I think they've given an emphasis to policies of dialogue. I think this will have to move on gradually, and I can only hope that it will be successful. I haven't been to the East for 2 months. At that time, it was before it became acute. At that time, my feeling, and that was by previous feelings during previous visits as well, that people in the East, they do have concerns. They have serious social and economic concerns. Donbass is a region with significant economic challenges ahead. And I do understand that people are worried there. Some of them feel that the authorities in Kiev, whichever those are not listening enough to the social and economic concerns they have. I mean, these things happen in all of our countries. So a dialogue on that, I think, is very necessary. But I did not detect during my previous visits any urge or any support for some of these illegal armed activities that we are seeing now. So there should be the possibility to move forward with dialogue. It is difficult to do in a climate that is very much driven by both the illegal armed groups, and let me add the factor that should not be neglected, Russian propaganda. I mean, some of you probably look far more on Russian television than I do, particularly for language reasons. And it is massive. It is a massive misinformation campaign that is fueling fears among people. I have a certain background from the Balkan Wars. And I saw down there in the beginning of the Balkan Wars how perfectly peaceful people who were living together, suddenly sort of massive propaganda was saying the fascists, Stasha in that particular case, were coming to kill you. And first people don't believe it because they haven't seen any of those around. But give it 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks of that, and some start to believe it and be genuinely afraid. So and that's a message that we're also trying to give with very limited effect so far to the Russian authorities, that they have a responsibility. Whatever you talk about Russian involvement in the East, the propaganda responsibility is clear-cut from their point of view.
I have a question here, please.
My name is Mirek Toda. I'm from Slovakia, from newspaper SME. Do you think that these elections on Sunday, they can be fair, even with the situation on the East where separatists hold governmental buildings, etc.? And I would like to add, after this election, if you see it's necessary that there will be change of government, it will be more colorful from opposition members, and if there is need for decentralization of the system of the country. Thank you.
Well, I'm not the one to form a government in Ukraine. I'm not even forming a government in Sweden. So I leave that in the hands of the elected politicians of Ukraine and the president after the election. I'm quite certain there will be vivid discussion about that. As for the election, I mean, take my present immediate experience from Kerasawan region. No question. I mean, no one. I mean, perfectly normal. I mean, I have no doubt that a free and fair election can be held across the vast territory of Ukraine. I'm also quite certain that some separatist forces will try to disrupt as much as they can in the East. And I know that the citizens of Crimea will be deprived of their possibility of voting, or the arrangement will be done for those that can get out of the territory of Crimea and vote, although I think numbers will be fairly limited. But I think there will be sort of a free and fair election on the overwhelming part of the territory of Ukraine. I have no doubt about that. Decentralization, whatever federalization, whatever has been talked about, I've said in discussions we've had inside the European Union on this, I have urged caution in the sense, and that's based on my personal experience. I've been member of 2 lengthy parliamentary reviews of the Swedish constitution, including the division of responsibilities that we have between the different levels, particularly on the fiscal side. It's very complicated, even in a country like Sweden. I have a certain experience of people doing too hasty decisions on those sorts of issues in the Balkans, and then you have to live with the consequences for a very long time to come. How you organize a state is something that must be very carefully deliberated and discussed, particularly on the fiscal side. So I do think it is, in all countries, necessary, and many countries have a very vivid debate. I think the Belgians are now in their 7th big constitutional review on the division between the state and the different 3 levels in that particular area, so 4, however you define it. The Brits have their debates. In Germany, the question of division between the Länder and the federal level is a very sensitive issue. So yes, might well be, but I think that discussion should not be, that is not something that can be dictated by foreign diplomats. That can only be decided by the elected politicians of Ukraine themselves after careful deliberation.
I have a question here, Radio Liberty.
Radio Liberty, Богдана Костюк. According to information collected by Ukrainian and Western specialists, the Russian technical, military techniques, which is quite close to the Ukrainian border, has been colored in the UN peacekeeping colors. If tanks with such the colors are to cross the border between Russia and Ukraine, what answer the European Union is able to give to Russia? Thank you.
Well, I've seen those reports in the social media, but the pictures associated with the media, with those reports, do not show that. I mean, you know, the UN peacekeeping colors is pure white, and so far I haven't seen any pure white tanks. On the other side, I've seen a lot of green things, but I haven't seen any white things. So we follow reporting very closely, but that particular thing can't be verified by the photos that have been shown. The tanks are distinctly green.
I have a
Oh, there are green tanks across the border, that's for certain. Yeah.
If the grand,
Sorry?
what happens if the green tanks cross the border?
If the green tanks cross the border, it's aggression. I mean, that's international law is as clear as it gets, and we've been very clear on what happened in Crimea on that particular respect. Be that green men, or be that green tanks, or be that green helicopters, or even other colors, I have to say.
Question here, please.
Unit Translation. Агентство «Укрінформ», Василь Короткий. Зараз між Україною і Росією назріває чергова газова криза. І існує така, яка заторкне в тому числі і Європейський Союз. Існує така ідея, щоб Брюссель надіслав своїх спостерігачів на газорозподільчі станції на сході і на заході України. Як ви відноситесь до цієї ідеї і взагалі які є механізми в Брюсселі для унеможливлення цієї кризи? Дякую.
Well, there are talks ongoing on that, but let me quite honest with you. I'm not sufficiently up to speed on the sufficient on an expert on the gas issues, and that goes to the simple fact that Sweden is one of the countries in the world or in Europe that has virtually no gas whatsoever. So we don't really have the expertise in Sweden to be able to assess these things, and accordingly, inside the European Union, when we discuss these things, I always defer to my colleagues from countries that knows the issues far better. So I defer the answer to the question, and I hope that there will be others available from the European Union side. But there are intense talks going on around it, and notably with Slovakia. I saw Miroslav, Minister Lajčák in Bratislava 2 days ago. My colleague Radik Sikorski from Poland is here today for talks, and I'm quite certain the issue will be on the agenda there.
Mike?
Foreign Minister, can you tell us do you think that the EU has the gumption and resolution to, well, apparently, the Russians are never going to give Crimea back. This is part of their homeland now, and it's just Putin's invested way too much in it. Even if the, in the unlikely event everything settles down in the east and it remains Ukrainian, do you still think that the EU has the resolution to enact long-term diversification from Russian resources to where in 3, 4, or 5 years you're getting 30–40% less gas, oil, timber, everything from Russia because invaders aren't really reliable sources, and as a long-term punishment for their actions?
Well, I think a number of quite a lot of these things will happen by itself. So irrespective of sanctions. I mean, what is very, very important for business relationship, for economic relationships, is predictability. Businessmen want predictability. They want reliability. If you do sort of business with someone, you must trust that particular person, or that particular business, or the politics of that particular country. And what President Putin has done is made Russia into an unpredictable country. And business don't like to make business with unpredictable partners. And countries who are dependent upon sort of gas supplies would like to diversify. Whether they will cut, I don't know. That's up to them to decide. But I think you see the rush be going on for quite a number of years, but these things take time to build pipelines and LNG terminals so they can diversify. And I'm quite certain that will happen. Will sort of Russian raw materials be completely of no use? No. I mean, Sweden, as I said, we have no gas whatsoever. Do we buy Russian oil? Yes, we do. Do I know how much we buy? Well, a couple of months ago, I know that we took 40% of our oil for a month. Do I know what's going to be next month? No, I don't. Because that market is entirely different. It can be 0 one month, it can be 80% another month. We are not dependent upon it. But of course, the oil is there on the world markets. And that I think is the important thing. But let me then say also that the most important thing to help Ukraine is not what we can do to sort of sanction Russia, because even if sanctions work, they work fairly long term. The most important thing is to bring stability to Ukraine. It is the democratic stability of Ukraine, it is the credibility of the economic reforms of Ukraine, it is the democratic maturity of Ukraine that at the end of the day is going to decide the outcome of it. If Ukraine were to fail in its politics or fail in its economy, then it will be different. If Ukraine succeeds in its politics and succeeds in economic reforms, then Ukraine will be a strong country to be able to withstand pressures and destabilization. So the main thrust of our policies is really to help with the stability. I said, to simplify, from the European Union policies are to help to stabilize Ukraine, while Russia at the moment is to destabilize Ukraine. And the success of these the balance between those efforts that is going to be decisive, and the decisive effort there is going to be made by the Ukrainian politicians themselves.
Please.
I'm Thomas Hall from the Swedish daily Dagens Nyheter. When you were talking about the situation in eastern Ukraine, you were also talking about the necessity of dialogue to resolve the situation. Wednesday this week, this national dialogue started under participation of the OSCE. The separatists were not invited and did not take part there. Do you think it would be wise to try to include them and invite them?
Well, I mean, I was down in Kerasawan and other places, so I didn't follow it. But I will see Ambassador Ischinger, who's an old friend of mine, later today, to get his assessment of the situation. I have emphasized that I think the main dialogue must be with the democratic elected politicians of the East. I made a point of meeting, trying to meet as many representatives also of the party. I met the Party of Regions down in Kerasawan yesterday. I met a number of RADA representatives of the Party of Regions from the East when I was here the last time. They are the elected representatives of the people of the East. And I think those should be the number ones that one talks to. Is there going to be a second stage of some sort with the legal separatists or with armed people? That's not for me to judge, but I don't think that should be the same thing. I think it is the elected representatives of the people in Donetsk or Lugansk or wherever it is, Kharkov, those are the ones that should be. And then it's for them, really, to go out and anchor their policies with the people. Because otherwise there's a risk of, if you take steps and say that you invite all of these green guys with guns to the table, then you sort of delegitimize the democratic institutions of the country. And that, I think, would be do long-term damage. Sorry?
I have a
You
question
need,
here.
but at some stage you need some kind of dialogue even with those people, don't you?
Could be, but I think if that is also a responsibility of perhaps the elected representatives to see how that could be done. And as you notice, I'm rather cautious in giving too much public advice on these things, because I think that they are the ones that well, I'm not quite certain they know these people, but they have the credibility among the people. It's also a question of isolating these guys from the popular support that they might have or might gain if this continues. I think this is extremely important, that you sort of try to isolate them through the dialogue, and exactly what happens then in the later stage. We should not create the impression that you can get influence by a gun, and that those that are democratically elected are irrelevant. And as said, I mean, the East is dominated by the Party of Regions. The Party of Regions has gone through a very difficult time, but we should not forget that during the elections for X numbers of years, it's been the single largest political party of the country, and they have elected representatives.
I have a question here, please.
Інтерфакс Україна, Ігор Соловей. Ви говорили про значний вплив на схід України російської пропаганди. Чи в той же час українські високопосадовці говорять і про збройне втручання через диверсійні групи і інші збройні формування Російської Федерації? Чи ви вірите цим повідомленням, і чи є у вас свідчення, підтвердження збройного втручання Російської Федерації на територію України?
As I said, I've been in primarily Donetsk quite a number of times during the years, and I've also been visiting the shops there now and then, going around in the streets. And I've never noticed that you can buy RPGs or anti-aircraft missiles or heavy machine guns in the shops of Donetsk. It's a novelty. And I'm quite certain I would have been made aware of if that was the fact. If you look at some of the military equipment, not all of it, but if you look at some of the military equipment that is there, I mean, I made a tweet somewhat ironic the other day when they were shooting down two helicopters with missiles, and I said it might have been some elderly ladies who passed by the grocery shop and picked up an anti-aircraft missile. That's clearly not the case. These things are coming from somewhere, and some of them have the markings of a nearby country.
The final question, as I understand.
Kyiv Post, Mark Rishkevich. How prepared is the EU to, back about the sanctions, how prepared is the EU to scale up sanctions to apply them to sector-wide areas of Russia's economy, being whether it's finance or energy or high tech, should further aggression take place? Because we've seen a reluctance, primarily from Great Britain, Germany, and France, who have given priority to profit motive business relations and other. Do you see, a resolve in the EU to upgrade the sanctions? Thank you.
On Monday in Brussels, one of the decisions that we took was to prepare exactly that, because we had the legal framework that we had in place prior to that did not allow it. So now we have changed and have a new legal framework that allows for exactly that, and that was a unanimous decision. So the readiness there, I mean, the formal legal preparations for that are now in place. Yes.
Minister, thank you so much for your time. We're conscious of your schedule. We would love for this conversation to go on, but thank you very much for visiting Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You.